Interesting story today out of Politico talking about Jon Stewart and Barack Obama. Apparently they had some secret meetings. Ooh, drums. So let's go to the details. Jon Stewart apparently slipped unnoticed into the White House in the midst of the October 2011 budget fight, summoned to an Oval Office coffee with President Barack Obama. Whoa, okay, that sounds fun. We'll find out why in a little bit. And then there was a second meeting in February 2014. Obama again requested Stewart make the trip from Manhattan to the White House, this time for a mid-morning visit hours before the president would go before television cameras to warn Russia that there will be costs if it made any further military intervention in Ukraine. Now, is this nefarious? It's being played up on the internet with a lot of headlines like, Stewart, secret meetings with Obama. No. Look, the president wants to talk to a guy who's influential. And of course, if the president asks you to come to the White House, you come to the White House. So it's both perfectly logical. Now, what they asked him to do is interesting. We'll get to that at the end. And that is a little problematic if you ask me. But first, why do they want to talk to him? Because look at all the influence that he has. Now, remember the 9/11 responders bill? They were the guys who obviously went in first, and they got sick, a lot of them did, in the cleanup of 9/11 when they were trying to find the bodies still in 9/11. And the Republicans who say 9/11, 9/11, 9/11 decided that they were going to abandon those guys. And they were going to strip away funding for the health care of those 9/11 responders. And Jon Stewart went on the air and mocked them for it, and they immediately turned around. And I said it at the time, and I've said it throughout, I've never seen anyone be that effective on any piece of legislation in the media anywhere. Forget satire shows, no news show, no nothing, no single politician. And this article talks about it, and they're absolutely right. It was as effective a moment as I have seen in politics when one person basically screams from the rooftops and wins. And even the 9/11 responders, Army veteran John Field said, what took us 8 years of walking the halls of Congress, Jon Stewart in 22 minutes literally moved mountains and gave us a heartbeat again when we were flatlined. Now, he's, by the way, done this on many veterans issues, and on another veterans health care issue. He did it again. In March of 2009, Stewart discussed the new Obama administration's idea of removing veterans with private insurance plans from the VA rolls. That can't be right, he intoned. The Obama White House scrapped the plan one day after his advocates recall Stewart's commentary being discussed during a West Wing meeting with senior aides, including then Chief of Staff Rahm Emanuel. So he was wonderfully nonpartisan that way, and he still is. He would take George Bush to task. Now, we know Jon Stewart's generally progressive. There's no question about that. But he would also take Barack Obama to task, which we love on this program. And in that case, he took him to task on the veterans issue. And it's good to see somebody pushing from the left that actually affects Obama. Especially in his first term, he mainly got affected by people pushing from the right. I mean, he would change what he was going to do. And one time, Shirley Sherrod basically asked to leave immediately from our office because Glenn Beck was about to talk about her on air. So if Jon Stewart was a countervailing force to the Obama administration getting intimidated by Fox News nonstop, that's fantastic. Now, more about his power. Remember, of course, he was on Crossfire famously before the Obama years and said, you're hurting the country, when Tucker Carlson and Paul Begala used to be the hosts of it in its original version. And then the chief of CNN agreed with Jon Stewart and got rid of the show and Tucker Carlson. Another win for America. So it makes sense that the president wants to talk to a guy like this. In fact, one of the president's top advisors, David Axelrod, said, I can't say that because Jon Stewart was unhappy, policy changed, but I can say that he had forceful arguments. They were arguments that we knew would be heard and deserved to be answered. Wow. Okay. So obviously he had a clear effect on the president. And he's among the very few progressives in the country who did have an effect on the president. So I'm ecstatic that he did and that he was around to make those forceful arguments, which they actually listened to. Now, the irony of all that is in the 2011 meeting, the part of the reason they brought him in was that they were hoping to enlist him in their fight against other progressives. Yeah, that sounds like the Obama administration that I know. They explained here in Politico at the 2011 sit-down, Goolsbee, another top advisor to President Obama, said the president wanted to counter his critics on the left and lay the groundwork for his 2012 re-election campaign. Now, we have no reason to believe that Jon Stewart did that in the least bit. I've never seen that on air. And, there was some mention in the article about after the meeting about Russia, then Jon Stewart made fun of Putin. Jon Stewart always makes fun of Putin. He didn't need the president's help in that direction. So I don't see that the president was able to influence Jon Stewart in any negative fashion, and he certainly did not attack the left. Jon Stewart didn't, right? But it appears that Jon Stewart at least affected the president in a positive direction. So overall, I'll take it. Anybody pushing the president to go to the sensible, honestly, middle of the country, if you go based on the polling, the middle of the country is very much progressive on almost every single issue: Social Security, tax cuts for the rich, war. You go down the list, even immigration, gay rights. The country is progressive. And if Jon Stewart helped to push the so-called progressive president in that direction, great. Even if he was doing it when the president was trying to push the country into a less progressive position. And that's what we won't find out from the meetings. For all the people who doubted that Obama was not really a progressive, how much more evidence do you need? He takes the best voice for progressivism in this country, fortunately or unfortunately. I mean, I love the guy, but the president should be listening to people who care about policy, to the Progressive Caucus, to other people in the media who do this for a living. Doesn't listen to any of those. Fox News, David Brooks from the New York Times. Listen to all these conservatives. On the other side is just one guy, Jon Stewart. Okay, but apparently he was at least a big enough presence to balance out the equation a little bit, and it needed balancing out because President Obama is not a progressive.